Since March of 2020, so much has changed. How we work, how we live, the tools we use, the way we collaborate. Hello and welcome to The Bridge. Join host Scott Kinka in a series of discussions of how some of the top leaders in technology bridged their businesses, technology, roadmaps, and lives into their new hybrid work reality. Our hope is that their insights and experiences will help you on your journey in business and in life, from who we were to who we are today. And maybe it'll help you get better prepared for whatever comes next. The Bridge is a service of Bridgepoint Technologies, one of the nation's leading IT advisory, procurement, and lifecycle management companies. Now, here's your host.
Hi, and welcome to The Bridge. I'm Scott Kinka. My guest on this episode is Dr. Carlson. He's the Director of Segment Marketing for Equinix. We joked a little bit. I asked him what DR meant. He said disaster recovery. DR's been at Equinix for two different stints. He's about to have his fifth anniversary with the company. Father of four, 10 to 18 years old from Ashburn, Virginia, kind of right where colo all started. Equinix started as a peering provider. I sort of threw out, hey, I know them as colo, and he sort of corrected me. They built colo around their peering network, and from there became one of the larger network service providers in the world. They consider themselves, given their interconnection strategy, an on-ramp to the digital economy. I'll describe that a little bit more in a few moments. What I really loved about this conversation is that DR is both a technologist and a marketing guy. He had some really polished answers around some of the things that we talk about on this podcast all the time. Here's an example. He compared the pandemic to a health scare. Interesting, right? The things that you should do to get healthy aren't really any different than the things that you should do before you're sick, right? But now those things are more important. He applied that to the pandemic. He used that to explain sort of the impending event that the pandemic became. If you were doing the right things, you were generally fine. If you weren't, you were sick and you needed to react quickly. We talked about how to think about the digital transformation in 2023, and he made it really simple. The way that Equinix talks about the digital economy is that businesses need to focus on three things. First, interconnecting their core. Second, interconnecting their digital systems. And then third, interacting at the edge. Now, I'm not going to describe each one of those things in detail here, and I couldn't do it as good as he does. But generally speaking, if your initiative doesn't fit into one of those categories, don't do it. I'll let him break that down a little bit more on the pod, but I do think it's a useful way to break down your technology roadmap. He also describes the cloud hangover, and what he means by that is running into clouds and looking at them as destinations. When really they're just a portion of an overall network strategy. Data center, core, has moved, but apps drive traffic. Edge is largely now in the home. So consider how people, traffic, and patterns flow. And that should really be the root of the IT conversation. And this is what, in his mind, in some cases is driving customers away from 100% cloud infrastructure into hybrid architectures. We've heard that repeated quite a bit on the pod so far this year. Everyone is trying to do the same thing, connect more people in more locations with more devices to more information in a secure manner. The lesson I took from it, stop buying tech and start supporting use cases. Understand the users. We wrapped up with his love of Spotify and his desire to play Stephen the Irishman in the movie Braveheart. You'll love that. This chat was a lot of fun, and I definitely stole some nuggets that will become a part of my speak going forward. Here is DR, Disaster Recovery Carlson, the Director of Segment Marketing from Equinix. Hi, welcome to The Bridge. I'm your host, Scott Kinka. My guest today is Dr. Carlson, who is the Director of Segment Marketing for Americas for Equinix. How are you today, DR?
Doing well. Glad to be here. So
fantastic. You got to tell me what DR stands for.
Yeah, well, the joke is you would think it'd be disaster recovery, which is why I would have to be in this industry, but it actually stands for Dudley Ronald, which then most people say, I understand why you go with
Yeah, I was going to say, you stick with disaster recovery. That's a good parlor joke. I like that at the beginning. How long have you been in Equinix?
So this go around, I'm coming up on 5 years. I actually was here from 2011 to 2015 in sales, and then left to go run sales for a company that built messaging for companies like Salesforce, LinkedIn, but also the opportunity to train TED speakers. And then came back to Equinix. And so I'm coming up on my second fifth-year anniversary.
Wow. Okay. That's an interesting story. That is not what you typically hear. There's either one long run or, you're out. I've had all kinds of interviews on the pod where I actually had one recently where the individual that I interviewed had two moves since the pandemic, which was really interesting. I am the Great Resignation. We got into all that as we went. Tell us a little more about DR, outside of work.
So father of four. I have an 18-year-old, a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old. So my weekends are spent driving them to different sporting events all around the East Coast.
And you're located where?
I'm here in Ashburn, Virginia.
Ashburn, Virginia. Fantastic. Well, we're not so far. I'm just outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. Well, so there's the small talk. We got that part out of the way. We're going to talk about Equinix now. Equinix is a co-location provider. Tell me that I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you that you're wrong. I would say that initially that's how we started. Years ago, we merely started as a place where the networks were coming together to peer traffic. And since they were peering traffic inside of Equinix, this is where they built out their core infrastructure. And so when you think about the world's leading network service providers, there's usually a 95% overlap between their core infrastructure and our data centers. And in the years since then, industries have realized that the closer they were to this core infrastructure, the more it was going to benefit their business. And so we have gone from the early inception of this co-location to now these data centers being on-ramps to the world's largest digital platform.
Gotcha. Fantastic. On the pre-prep, you threw a line out there. I'm going to prompt you to say it again. You are colo, give it to me again because it was great.
Yeah, I said, we're co-location. We provide co-location like Ferrari provides tires. It's part of the process. It's not why people leverage us.
Yeah, look, I get it. I mean, at the end of the day, there's got to be a reason for doing a thing. And I think our reasons have changed. So we're going to come back to that in a minute, but let's talk about why in a lot of cases, and it's kind of thematic on the bridge for this season, why things have changed, have really been around. I mean, it's fairly obvious, right? March of 2020 through whenever, depending on what country or area or color state you were in, right? The pandemic ended, or at least is coming off of, but we're returning, I think, at least to some level of normalcy in that. But take us back to the early days. You obviously been at Equinix for 5 years. You're obviously in management there. You're in marketing, so you're sharing external messages. So you had to have been in around sort of surrounding the room where it happened. I mean, tell me about the experience of Equinix at the beginning of the pandemic, that whatever it was, second, third week of March. When did it start becoming a thing? When did y'all start talking about it? When did you start thinking about it from a business perspective? Take us back.
Yeah, I remember we were actually in Atlanta. We were doing a road show with a partner and came back. And that week they announced that they were going to close the offices. And I remember saying to a coworker, we'll be back by June. So I can say I didn't say which year. So all right.
Well, then you're a soothsayer.
Right. I would say I was right. I often tell the story around when people talk about the pandemic because it is so big and plays such a gigantic role in so many of our customers' journey. I had the ability to moderate our customer advisory boards in the Americas, in Europe, and Asia Pac, and every one of them almost calls out the COVID, demarc as when things really started to speed up for them when it came to this idea of digital transformation. And I tell the story about years ago, my father had quadruple bypass surgery. And after the surgery, the doctor came in the room and said, listen, I'm going to need you to do three things. I'm going to need you to exercise, eat healthier, and lose weight. And my dad, trying to break the tension in the room, said, that sounds like the same three things you've been telling me for the past 10 years. And the doctor, not amused, said, yeah, I'm just hoping now you listen.
Yeah.
I said, I didn't realize it at the time, but what the doctor was merely talking about, or what my father's quadruple bypass surgery showed, it didn't create new categories of healthy living. It did reveal the three most important. And in that exact same way, what we saw with COVID was it didn't create new categories of digital transformation. It did reveal the three most important. And so what we've seen is where companies are focusing now and where they're putting all of their energy is this idea of deploying and interconnecting their digital core, integrating their digital ecosystems, and then interacting at the digital edge. And when I share that with companies, I'll say, if you can think of one of your IT projects that doesn't fit into one of those three categories, let me know what it is and I'll add it to the list. I've been saying that for 2 years now, and no one has given me anything to add to that list.
Well, it's funny. I mean, we had a conversation about some of the projects. We're sort of prepping all of our end of the year marketing stuff right now, meeting with our SEs, top trends in this, we know all that stuff goes on. And we've chatted about a lot of these kinds of topics. And I think one of the things that popped up was all of these good ideas just lacked an impending event, was one of the comments that have come out of that. And then all of a sudden, here you are sending everybody home. It's not that we weren't already embracing technologies or beginning to embrace technologies that supported it, but now, necessity is the mother of invention, right? You move that way. So collaboration, let's just jump just real quick back into a little bit of Equinix. What did you all do culturally from an application and collaboration perspective? Like, you all got home, what happened? Were you already using a collaboration tool? Yeah. Did you jump there? Like, share a little bit of that.
Yeah, the great news was pre-pandemic, we were talking about these three ideas. Yeah. Just deploying and interconnecting your core, integrating ecosystems, interacting at the digital edge. So when the pandemic hit, many of these companies who had put some of those in place were able to leverage them. One of the world's largest banks shared with us that they were able to turn up 120,000 remote workers in 3 days. There were other companies who had solutions that were completely dependent upon bandwidth, who overnight were seeing 100% increase in utilization. And thankfully, they had deployed inside of Equinix, and all they needed to do was turn up more bandwidth, which they had the ability to do in hours as opposed to days, weeks, or months. And so for us, it was really just sticking to the playbook that we had been calling out for years. But to your point, a lot of people had the ability to sit back and wait. And when COVID came, you talk about a compelling event. They did not have the ability to wait any longer. You think about healthcare, who now overnight had to have the ability to meet patients where they were, right? You think about retail, who overnight had to turn up online services, right? Finance, who had always been dependent on this seamless end-to-end interaction, and manufacturing, who was thinking about introducing machine-to-machine and industrial IoT into factories that were in the middle of nowhere. And now they had to accelerate all of these plans.
Yeah, 100%. It's funny. So those three things, I'd like to explore them a little bit, because I think you hit on, I think what you were talking about on the first part of that was the digital core, right? Those that were already moving, serving the core of the business out of an Equinix data center were well positioned for you to be able to turn bandwidth up, turn edge security up, provide intelligence on the way in. But those that didn't, obviously, couldn't. It's funny that I've said on a couple of these pods, and we benefited from it as a technology advisory, but we sold so much bandwidth in March, April, and May of 2020 to add additional bandwidth to headquarters.
Yeah.
Just for companies to get their end users into the office logically, to get them back out to what was largely cloud applications, right? And I guess that's kind of your point is that really your point about the root of it being, number one, core infrastructure, not bound to the office, not bound to the shiny buildings, move your kind of central, monolithic core applications out, healthcare. I'm thinking of digital imaging systems and things like that as a basis. It shouldn't be your location is just another home user at the end of the day. Right. The center's got to be in an Equinix data center. Is that or a data center? Is that what you mean by the moving the core first?
Yeah, and what we say all the time is you think about how people used to build infrastructure, like their legacy architecture.
Yeah.
Everyone used to build their networks coming back to their headquarters because that's where all of their critical applications sat. But you ask people today, is that where all of your critical applications sit today? And no one gets that question wrong. They're like, no. Yeah, then that old network architecture doesn't make sense anymore. And we believe that you start with the core because the network is the foundation of digital transformation. Everyone wants to talk about cloud. Everyone wants to talk about, interacting at the edge. But all of that is going to sit on top of your network. And unfortunately, a lot of companies had still had this legacy architecture, bringing everyone back to their headquarters. One of our customers in our advisory board said, I woke up one day and realized my data center wasn't in Michigan anymore. He said, don't get me wrong, the building is still sitting there.
Yeah.
He said, but the applications and all of my people that use those applications are nowhere near Michigan.
Yeah.
On top of that, with what's interesting is when we saw that legacy architecture, that centralized architecture, what used to be the solution was people would just add more bandwidth.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is when doing that on a legacy architecture, it just makes that network more rigid. So what used to be the solution is actually now making the problem worse.
Worse, yeah.
And so we're seeing companies move to more of a distributed hub architecture. And the reason that we feel the most efficient place to put it is inside of Equinix, again, back to this idea of that's where all of the networks built their core infrastructure.
Yeah.
So you can't get any closer to the core infrastructure than inside of Equinix.
I love what you said there about about the answer just being adding bandwidth when the core was in the wrong spot. I'll give you one back. I'm going to use your Ferrari statement somewhere else, but I'll give you one you can use. We typically call that Jaws theory, right? We're going to need a bigger boat.
Yeah.
Right. But you're not going to beat the shark by just throwing bandwidth at it at the end of the day. You've got to rethink the strategy, towards defeating the shark and that kind of model. So let's take a step out then. We can just follow your analogy. So you start at the core.
Yep.
We get it. The center of the network, most of the applications that people are using are already out at cloud applications. The last piece to move, and you're talking about it in medical, in retail, in manufacturing and distribution, these monolithic ERP and medical device systems and all that. Get that stuff out. The core is no longer the largest building in the network or on the WAN. It's one of the data centers. Your second point was application centric, I believe.
Or ecosystems.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's this idea of integrating the ecosystems that you're using. And I think one of the big mistakes we saw companies make early on, and a lot of people mention this, is cloud. And so they viewed cloud as a destination instead of a component of an overarching strategy. And so then it just made sense, if it was a destination, to put everything there. I don't need to go into the details of what the cloud hangover looks like. Mm-hmm. But now companies were saying, well, maybe we shouldn't put everything in there. And we totally agree. Yeah. And so again, back to this idea of the network being the foundation of digital transformation. This is why the cloud service providers started building their on-ramps inside of Equinix, because they realized the closer they were to this core infrastructure, the more of their services they were going to be able to sell. Or as we like to say, connections enable consumption, which is why there are more cloud on-ramps inside of Equinix than anywhere else in the world. And so now these companies that are anywhere on this private, hybrid, or multi-cloud journey realize they can now turn up and turn down service to these cloud service providers, as well as the SaaS providers who are providing their services in a cloud-like fashion. Because that's what people mean. They're like, I want to consume all of these services as a service, right? We live in a subscription-based economy. And so now companies are looking to be able to consume more services, not just the services from cloud service providers, but software, software as a service, or any other, vendors that they might be using.
Got it. Let's situationalize that one for a minute, because there were sort of two things that jumped out in that for me. We'll start on sort of the infrastructure side. we see enough of what you said around hybrid cloud that we dedicated a session to it at our summit in September, our tech summit in September. We called it Out to the Cloud and Back Again, a hybrid journey. We were playing off The Hobbit there a little bit with that title, but I think you get the idea. A lot of our customers who, went from jumped straight from local infrastructure and then, corporate edict, right? Board level edict. Let's get all this stuff out to the cloud, wrapped it up. Applications that don't efficiently use bandwidth, don't efficiently use processor, let's put them in a wrapper, stuff them in Kubernetes and throw them out there. And we're good. We're transformed. And then found expenses overrunning, found management difficult, now doesn't knock that as a destination, but potentially knocks it as the destination for all workloads. So we do have customers coming back to us now and going, all right, I get it. I've now identified that this 25, 50, 75% of my workloads belong in a hyperscale, but I need to bring it back and I need some more traditional colo space or maybe dedicated hosting or what have you, but they need to be at land speed, right? For me to be able to make that stuff work. So when you talk about the interconnected network, situationalizing it, that's part of what you mean, is that in your network centers, you're already cross-connected into Azure, you're cross-connected into Amazon, you're cross-connected into GCP. Can they buy that sort of logically from you, turning up and turning it down very easily? Or are they sort of dedicated cross-connects? Like, how does that work?
Both. I mean, a number of different ways, right? Yeah. And a lot of that we do with our partners who are starting to understand that what these companies really are looking for is cloud adjacent data, right? They want to get their data as close to the cloud service provider as possible so that, they have the ability to, again, what percentage do they need in there? Let them decide. I was talking to a client not too long ago who was talking about how they had gone 100% in on cloud and they realized it was a mistake. And I said, well, what are you going to do this year? He said, we're going to go 80%. And I said, well, how do you know that's right? And he's like, I don't. Right? And they might not. And so why would you go, all in or 80% in if you're not sure? Why wouldn't you instead want to leverage all of the benefits of cloud, and then you determine how much of that you need to use? And so that's what we're seeing, and companies starting to realize that our platform is really their new on-premise. Yeah. Right. Instead of thinking about it as a separate place, it is merely a new on-premise for them, which again sits on top of all of the network service providers, right next to all of the cloud service providers.
Or thinking of it the other way, think of what historically would have been the headquarters location, and the center of the network as a location that now accesses, a different core.
Absolutely. Back at the time when the headquarters was where all of your people sat and all of your applications were. Yeah. And so this is really the new type of headquarters. It's just getting the applications as close to the end user as possible.
So that, I think, was your third tenet, right? We started with core, we went to ecosystem. Excellent segue. You've told this story a couple times. I appreciate that. I'm getting all the prompts. Let's go there. Let's talk about end users.
Yeah. So what's interesting about the edge is pre-pandemic, there was a lot of talk. It seemed like a lot of people wanted to spend a lot of time defining where the edge was or naming it, right? Is it far edge, near edge, macro edge, micro edge, They spent more time on that. And what we started realizing is there was 100% agreement that there was an edge, probably not a whole lot of agreement on where that was. But what we found out through our customer advisory boards, and we would ask customers in the room, where do you define your edge? And not surprisingly, every company determines the edge to be where their information meets their end users. Yeah. And so what we found is it's really one of the first things that the consumer will determine where it is, right? The networks determine where the networks were laid. Cloud service providers determine where the on-ramps were, but it'll be us and the devices that we use, whether it's this one or the one I'm staring into, that define where the digital edge is. So a, rental car company defined their edge as the tablets that their agents used, as well as the cars that their customers rented. A food supply company defined the edge as, again, the tablets that their people used, as well as the trucks that drove the pallets around that also had devices on it that could determine where that shipment was. And so, but as we say, regardless of where that edge is, you still have to connect to it.
Yeah.
One of the members of our customer advisory board had stated that the more they looked into the edge, they realized that it was a lot like the core because it was going to come down to connectivity.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, look, I can imagine if I'm just looking at your network fabric, if I was a guy in an Equinix NOC looking at how traffic flowed in and out of your data centers in February of 2020,
yeah,
and how the traffic flowing in and out of the same customer looks today, they'd be wildly different.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, kind of 1,000 points of light. Are you guys participating other than sort of doing it strategically? Are there products and offerings that you have that are engaging in sort of the edge side of that discussion with your customers? Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. We talk a lot about how early on the financial industry is deployed inside of Equinix because how important low latency was to them.
Yeah.
And then we often ask, do you know what other industry low latency is really important in? All of them, right? 88% of IT decision makers cite low latency as the most important quality of their network. Yeah. And what's the dominant factor that determines latency? It's the distance the packets have to travel. And again, because the networks have built their core infrastructure out inside of Equinix, our prospects and customers' data passes through our buildings one way or another. It either goes directly through it or indirectly through it. And we are creating solutions that enable our customers to leverage our platform and turn up services now in minutes. And that we give now customers the ability to consume our platform digitally. So our digital services, which we're now starting to offer, is merely the ability, what we're doing is removing barriers for our customers to consume our platform in the most efficient way possible anywhere in the world.
So I'll do the same thing I did on the last one. Let me situationalize that and see if I'm going to read it back to you. Tell me if I'm right. Getting back to that changing landscape of ingress and egress into a customer, today versus back then. Customer says, hey, I am mid-Atlantic based and everybody's at home. So my traffic to and from, as an example, Comcast's network has now increased fourfold. Is that, enabling that digitally? Are you saying effectively that what you guys are doing is allowing them to sort of shape prioritization, shape bandwidth facing the service providers? Like, do I have that right? And if I don't, correct me and sort of weave it back into.
No, yeah. And so what we do is we actually have the ability, what we have are these digital strategy plans that we've created that show where our customers and prospects are on the map. It shows the affinity to our platform, and then we give them the ability or go out with them and we do what we call digital strategy briefings to walk them through this idea of core, ecosystem, and edge. To find out first, where would it make sense if you establish this digital core, your biggest locations, and then the network service providers, cloud service providers, and all the other vendors that you need to connect to. And let's establish that digital core. Now that you've done that, let's start to take a look at the other vendors, the cloud service providers that you want to integrate with and integrate them there. Now that you have this established, what are the other further reaching locations where this information needs to reach your end users, and we can start to deploy you there. And so that's the process that we're looking at. Again, giving them access not only to the cloud service providers and SaaS providers, but that underlying network, again, that we say is the foundation of digital transformation.
Got it. So getting back to the conversation we had in our sort of pre-session, it still comes down to, whether you're Equinix or whether you're a SaaS provider right now, in a lot of ways, in that first appointment, who are your humans? What do they do? And what do you need for them to be efficient or more efficient than they are today? And sort of building the plan from there. They're not buying a product here. They're buying a solution regardless of what that story is. It sounds like.
We say all the time that regardless of the industry and size of the company, everybody is trying to connect more people in more locations with more devices to more information, all while being secure. And if that's true, which we believe it is, what do you need in order to do that? And we think it's deploying and interconnecting a digital core, integrating your digital ecosystems, and giving companies the ability to interact at the digital edge.
And stealing something from what you said earlier, this isn't a one-to-one interaction between the internet and a rack. It's a one-to-many relationship between end users, applications, and digital core, really, at the end of the day.
Right. I mean, as we talked about, right, how efficient would this device be if it allowed me to connect to only 10 people?
Yeah.
And we would say the same thing about your digital platform. What if it only gave you the ability to connect to a few providers, vendors, and partners?
Yeah.
Instead of what if you had the ability to connect to all of them?
Yeah. Super interesting. I think that's a good breaking point. So we're going to have a little bit of fun here. A couple of questions, and then I'm going to let you get back to your day.
All right.
The first one can be business related is the answer on this one. But I'm going to ask you for a shameless prediction, and then we're going to compile them all and go back and look at them maybe in a year. But 18 to 24 months, it doesn't need to be tech related, but it can be. Just give us a shameless prediction on something that you think is going to occur in 18 to 24 months.
Jeff Bezos will own the Commanders.
Well, certainly somebody will own the Commanders. That's a good one, though. We'll look at that. No, I get that one. Okay, here's your next question. Whatever the next, we talked about the pandemic here, but whatever the next great, oh crap moment we have is, zombie apocalypse, asteroid, whatever it is, the end result of that is that you've got one app that you can use on that mobile phone that you just held up in front of the camera. What's that one app that DR is taking with them through the asteroid fallout?
It's got to be Spotify.
Okay, I love it. You're a Spotify guy.
Yes.
I saw. What did you hold up there? Was that an Android device or an Apple device?
Apple.
Okay, and you weren't thinking Apple Music with all this new stuff that they've added in there, huh? You are zoned in on Spotify forever.
100%.
All right, why? Curious.
Just because it gives me almost an endless supply of content, podcasts. I love hearing other people talk about different things that they're experts in. I just love listening to people talk about things that they're passionate about.
Yeah. And you love it all in that one app then, including the pods. All right. Well, for those of you who are listening right here, you heard Spotify and podcasts as we go. So make sure that after you listen to this episode, you go in to your Spotify and make sure you look at The Bridge with Scott Kinka and give us a favorite or a like. There's my shameless plug. Okay. All right, here we go. You get to play supporting role. One of the three things here, given what you just said about the Commanders, I think I know what your answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask anyway. You get to be either the bass player in your favorite band. You get to be the supporting actor in your favorite movie. Or you get to be the gadget third down running back for the Redskins. Fire away. Which one and why?
Supporting actor in my favorite movie.
Okay. Can you tell me which one it is?
Yeah, Braveheart.
So who's which character is the supporting actor you want to play?
Yeah, if I had to pick one of those, it'd probably be Crazy Steve.
I like Crazy Steve. I think I'm watching that movie tonight now. I'm going to run out this door angrily yelling, and then I'm going to watch that movie tonight. Yeah. This was super entertaining, educational. It's interesting that every business that we meet with on the pod, regardless of whether they're all the way on the SaaS side providing an application or really, providing the infrastructure on which the SaaS application resides, runs, and gets people to it, has really been transformed along with our customers, sort of in a post-pandemic world. And your insight from the infrastructure side, from the core side on out, was a really interesting way of looking at it. I appreciate the time and the energy, and happy to have you on the bridge.
Hey, thanks so much for the opportunity and the time as well.
Absolutely. And for you all out there listening, we appreciate your time. We value it, and we're going to see you soon on another episode of The Bridge. Listen, if you made it this far, there must have been some good content, or you're just a fan or a relative of mine. In either case, we appreciate you spending your most valuable asset with us, your time. We don't take that lightly. We'd also like to say one more time that we are appreciative of Bridgepoint Technologies and their belief and sponsorship of this show. We hope that if you or someone you know is thinking about your company's digital transformation or simply the next IT project that you may not have the resources, budget, or time to get to, I'm sure that Bridgepoint, one of the country's fastest growing technology advisory and procurement firms, can help. Check out Bridgepoint at bridgepointtechnologies.com. Don't forget the E on Bridgepoint, or simply reach out to me at Skinka, SKINKA, at bpt3.net. Also, take a minute, please, if you would, to give us a 5-star review on your favorite platform. It helps gives us the visibility to reach other people like you. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Bridge. I am Scott Kinka, and until next time, there's a lot of noise out there. In business and in life, do what you can to be the signal. Thanks.